Divorced after 16 years of marriage and single at 39, I share my mistakes and experiences to help your marriage, improve your dating life, and prepare you for life after divorce.
So how do I look? Good?
You look good. You look good. As always, okay. Very handsome gentleman. So.
Oh, thank you, Rudy. Right back at you, man.
Thank you. Thank you. How are you doing? It's been a while since we've spoken.
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I can't complain. Things are going well. I mean, other than TikTok possibly being banned, I heard the entire argument this morning. I was compelled.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I was listening to it because, again, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for TikTok.
Yeah, right.
It gave me the audience of, the topics I discuss, and
right.
My whole platform is because of that. So I'm compelled to see what's going to happen.
I don't know. I always feel like politicians are like so self-absorbed and so concerned about themselves and their own pocketbook and fame and all of the things that our founding fathers and such were not concerned about.
Right.
They were concerned about, like, it was an act of service, to be a governor, to be a legislator, to be president, to be, now for us it's a way I can make a name for myself and get rich. Yeah. So I think in large part, I think a lot of this is just, it's the ban at its outset was really just for hoopla. It was to gain political ground and now now you have legal minds, supposedly the best legal minds in our country, tasked with having to make a determination as to whether or not that really meets the standard under the law. Are you able to simply say that you can ban a platform? I mean, I think free speech is absolutely paramount. I mean, I think you have to have something so substantial to outweigh that. I don't know all the inner workings of it, but God's honest truth, yeah. I don't see it. I don't see that you have anything close to that standard.
I don't. The government's argument, again, I'm not an expert, but just listening to it this morning, they're concerned that since it's China-owned, that they may influence the following, which is almost half the country, right? 180 million subscribers and followers, to influence them towards anti-American rhetoric. And they have the potential to do that, but the data from all of the Americans who are on the platform, it's housed in the United States. So right. It's the threat of potentially influencing its audience, but they have no evidence that it's ever occurred.
I'm getting so tired of that garbage being used as a cloak, a way to kind of disguise, trying to control free speech.
Thank you.
That's what it is.
Yes, it is.
Let's call it what it is. We want to control what you see and hear. And you want to know why they want to control it? Because these are elected officials whose livelihood is based on them getting elected. So exactly. If we control what information we can funnel to, quite honestly, part of the reason why I'm hopeful as Trump becomes president that he may change if there's in my opinion, a negative ruling, which means they do ban it, they do uphold it, that he may very well overturn that. He may very well do something different, and I'll tell you why. And I think it's for selfish political reasons. In that TikTok was huge for him to get elected.
Oh, yeah, and YouTube.
It was a huge piece. So I think he sees, hey, re-election, hey, it's supposed to be, it's an avenue for people to share information. How could you possibly say that's a bad thing?
I agree.
So
they're saying they may, I don't know if they had a legal term for it, but they may postpone this hearing and the actual banning of it because a new administration is going to be coming in the day after it goes dark. So why don't we just kind of postpone everything to see what this new administration is going to do? So that makes sense as well. So, but again, we'll see what happens. But again, I'm listening to it because it's very compelling. I think this is going to be studied in maybe law schools, maybe
right.
in a few years. It's a great argument.
Well, let's put it this way. Okay, if that's what you want to do, so issue a temporary stay.
Yeah.
Issue a temporary stay of enforcement of this ban. Mm-hmm. You could just as easily do that. Mm-hmm. Temporary stay, and we'll see. We'll let the new administration weigh in as to whether or not they really want to uphold this. I mean, God's honest truth, I think this administration, the current administration, just pushed through a bunch of crap legislation towards the end, or at least from what I'm seeing on TikTok, by the way. Obviously, you have to vet all the... Listen, anybody who has half a brain in their head, forgive my expression, must vet any information that they rely on to make sound judgments for themselves. Vet that information. You're going to get it from TikTok, right? Because I actually get a lot of news, quite frankly, from TikTok.
I do too.
Then vet it. Vet it. You don't automatically rely on it as gospel or truth. You vet it.
Yeah, and I think that's a whole other discussion there, but I think a lot of people do take it as a source of gospel, so let it be written, so let it be done. With me, if I hear a story on TikTok, I do more research. I check like other news outlets and say, is this actually happening? Because the headline may be misleading, so I go read the details of what's going on. Like, oh, that's not exactly what happened, but that's just me, but I think a lot of people actually don't do that anymore.
Is it
they read
better
the headline and that's it.
Is it better to have information that you're forced to vet rather than to have no information at all? It's funny because there's a quote from Denzel Washington years ago. They interviewed him on the red carpet or something like that about the news media. And he was like, look, he says, if you don't listen to the news or read the news, you're uninformed. But if you do, you're possibly misinformed. Yeah. He said, well, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
That's what the reporter said. He says, that's the challenge. Mm-hmm. That's the challenge for us now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You need to gather information. It needs to be out there, but then you need to vet it. Yeah. You need to be an active participant.
100%. 100%.
So anyhow, sorry for sidetracking with that.
No. That's I wanted to get your opinion on this, being a lawyer and all, but it's very compelling because, again, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for TikTok. I'm sure your audience is great there as well. I have a lot of my followers and close friends. I told them I'm going to interview Dennis Vetrano again. Oh, I love him. Tell him I love him. I'm like, okay, great. I'll tell him that you love him. So a lot of my followers and some close friends love your stuff. So again, kudos to you.
And listen, I will tell you, without this platform, I mean, look, do I get clients from it? Of course. But it's an avenue for me mainly to do what I love, which is to talk about my expertise and to offer free information. Now, when I do consultations, what I tell clients, prospective clients, is I say, as part of the process, go out and consume all the information that's out there. You don't believe necessarily any one person, but consume it all. Yes. Because for people, information gives you calm. What makes people have all that angst in the divorce process, pre-divorce process, contemplating the divorce process, all that anxiety and all that angst can be calmed with information. And right now, with the social media platforms we have out there, there is so much free information to consume. So for me, I want to talk about what I see, what I do, and let people consume that for free. Because listen, there's no two ways about it. There's no way to skirt this issue. Divorce lawyers, the good ones, are expensive. So before you have to pay my hourly rate or plunk down a retainer, or even during the process, consume that free information out there. It'll help give you some calm.
That's a great point. And that actually is the answer to my first question I had for you. I've been going live on TikTok at least 4 times a week for a couple of hours. And, I tell people, ask questions regarding post-divorce breakup, post-divorce like advice, or maybe post-breakup. And a lot of divorce questions come in. And I always tell everybody, as a disclosure, I am not an attorney. Every state is different. I don't want to tell you exactly what this may be because I don't have the answer. Go do your research, go study up, and then contact an attorney. And I wanted to ask you, and again, I think you just answered it already, before anybody contacts your office, like they're thinking about getting divorced, what would you recommend they do? And you just said study up, right? Are there any other suggestions that you would have for that person?
I think that's one of the things, and I think part of it is envisioning what your life will look like post-divorce. I mean, let's back up. I think for a lot of people, they've contemplated for some people, they've contemplated the divorce process for a long time. Yeah. And they know they're there. They know, hey, there's no way to fix this. And then for other people, again, because there's no one rule. There's no one size fits all with the divorce process, right? Or even relationships in general. So if you're not quite sure and or you're in a situation where you say, like, can I curse on this?
Go ahead.
Okay. Because that's typically me. So I'm just going to try to be who I am. I mean, like, I fucking hate this guy. Like, I'm going to stick it to him when we get through the divorce, or I can't wait to get a new girlfriend and shove it in her face. If you have those feelings, okay, let's talk just from the mental, emotional side. Yeah. Get your arms around those. Okay. That's part of it. Get your arms around those, because I will tell you, nothing makes a divorce more difficult, more contentious, more time-consuming, more expensive than if you don't take the time to get your arms around the remnants of the broken relationship, right? Because people come into these divorce processes with all this angst, all this anxiety, and then they're pissed off, and then they're like, now I'm getting divorced. I spent 10 years taking his shit or dealing with her stuff. Got to let go of that before you go into the process. Let go of that. And then insofar as the anxiety and the angst about the process, like, consume information. It will give you some calm for sure. Yeah. And then always talk to a divorce lawyer. I mean, look, the other thing I suggest for people is to make a list of things that they need to do in part of the divorce process. And I'm kind of bumping up against what your divorce lawyer will tell you they need and what you need to do through the process. So having a collective group of friends, good ones you can rely on, and I always tell people, sometimes you need that one friend who's going to kick you in the ass when you need to get a kick in the ass. And you're going to have that one friend who, right. And you're going to have that one friend where you need a shoulder to cry on. You need both of those friends. Choose who you're going to share information about the process with, and choose very wisely. Keep that group small. And then really just decide how much information you're going to share throughout the process. And then logistically, just envision what your life will look like post-divorce. Start planning for, like, hey, what is the custodial arrangement going to look like? What is my situation at work going to look like? Like, how are we going to pay the bills? Where am I going to live? Like, just start thinking about these things. It shouldn't be the day that the judgment of divorce is issued that you first start considering, like, how you're going to plan these things. Again, so you make that list of things to do, contacts, counselor, friends, gather some info, and then kind of go from there.
Okay. And that makes perfect sense. And people always ask me about the money, and I say, look, speak to a financial advisor as well. Maybe they can kind of guide you on what you can do, your spend, do like a complete assessment of your assets, liabilities, and just kind of help you, give you an idea. Because I don't know if, like, legal counsel offers any financial advice throughout the process if they have questions. I don't think you do, right?
No, they don't. But I think a lot of times I say to clients, look, your legal professional is only as good as the resources they have access to. And it's not necessarily within their office. So they should have access to forensic accountants, like private investigators, like financial advisors, like, and again, for you, like, so when a client comes in and hires us, the first thing we ask them for is a litany of financial information, some factual information, and the centerpiece of that, really, in terms of the financial information, is to complete a net worth statement. And like you said, you're going to go through your assets and your liabilities. You're going to see what you have. Well, maybe you have rental properties that develop income. What's going to happen with those? Like, maybe you work part-time. Maybe you're going to ultimately move to full-time. Like, maybe you're going to take a promotion, take a different job. So kind of planning from that net worth statement. But a lot of times they initially do that with the lawyer, or at least that should be the first thing the lawyer asks for. So that'll give you a clear financial picture, and then you can start planning from there.
Yeah. And the more answers you get, the less stressed you'll be. You'll have a clearer picture of what's ahead. Because
the biggest stressor with a divorce process is the unknown.
Yeah.
The unknown. You don't know what's going to happen. The way you calm that anxiety is by gathering information. So, like, again, I did a consult just the other day, and at the end, the prospective client said, I feel so much better now because now I know what the law is like. Now I know the likelihood of custody or this or that or what the options are. Like, so it's important to, like, start gathering information so that you can start answering your questions. So then the unknowns become maybe not necessarily knowns for certain,
right,
but the possibilities. Like sense. If you have to pay $1,000 a month for child support or $500 a month for child support, or you're going to receive $2,000 a month for spousal support or none, it's going to be a huge swing. It's going to make a big difference. So start gathering information to make the unknowns knowns.
Absolutely. Everybody, if you're listening, take some notes, okay?
Yeah, for sure.
I sent you some questions, but I want to skip around because the last questions I got were viewer questions last night, and they kind of pertain to what we're talking about. So
sure.
Somebody thinking for maybe a few months or years, they thinking about wanting to get a divorce, they finally do it, and they tell their spouse, I want a divorce. And we both know that moment, this can be really an emotional, heavy moment. They're going to be reactionary. They may get upset and say a lot of things.
Yep.
someone asked me a couple nights ago, my spouse is threatening that he's going to take everything. I'm not going to get a dime. I'm not going to get the house. He's going to take away my kids. Can they do that? How viable are the threats when they first hear that news when it comes to the court and the legalities and the process?
I mean, look, I'm not a lawyer for every jurisdiction,
Right.
and every factual circumstance is different, and the rules in different jurisdictions are different, different countries are different. But I will say, generally speaking, when somebody needs to threaten you about the things that they're going to do, I really take that with a grain of salt. Unless, look, and I always tell prospective clients, I say, look, nobody knows your spouse better than you do.
Right.
So like if a client calls in and says, hey, they've been threatening X, they've been threatening Y, they've been threatening Z. Oh, okay. Are you feeling safe? Like, do you feel like, is there a reason to be concerned? Has this happened before? Like, do you, and in addition to that, you want to prepare for the worst. You want to have a safety plan. What if somebody shows up at your house in the middle of the night and is trying to kick the door in?
Right.
Like, do you know who to call? Do you know where to go? Do you know, again, or if they kick you out of the house and say, I'm not letting you back in the house, and you call the police, and like, you have to have a legal plan, and then you have to have a logistical plan. So just like, safety plan, really. So.
Okay. Another gentleman asked that he told his wife he wanted a divorce, and she started withdrawing funds from all these accounts and closing them. He's like, now I have no money. Like, what can I do in that instant? Do law firms offer like some upfront money to live off of, like an allowance, and it gets paid back through the courts, or like how does that work, or is that even an option? I don't know.
Not as far as I'm aware of. But I will say in New York State they issue a temporary stay as soon as you file your divorce action, which is basically a court order that says neither party can start looting the assets or moving assets around or changing beneficiaries or taking people off the health insurance or anything like that. But look, a court order's a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper. It doesn't stop people from physically doing something necessarily, and it's only as strong as your will to enforce it, right? But I think, again, if you're concerned about that, talk to your lawyer right away. There are certain strategies you can put in play that will allow you to protect yourself from somebody looting the assets that are in your joint bank accounts. I mean, we've had situations where people have fled the country.
Yeah.
They've moved assets and they took off.
Yeah.
Is
there any extradition or anything that takes place to get them back into the States, or is it they're just
I
gone?
mean, you can try to do those things, and they're not necessarily criminal because many times at the time that they do those, they have equal access.
Yeah.
It's not like Rudy, like I reached into your account and took out money. It's like I took out money that was in mine and my wife's name.
Our account.
Which isn't illegal.
Right.
In and of itself. In the context of a divorce process, it's it's in violation, presumably in New York State, of the temporary stay. But I think the best thing you can do there is, and again, we back up to lawyers. Like what lawyer should you hire? How much should you spend? I say best case scenario is the money's no object approach. I know, he's a divorce lawyer. He just wants to take him out. Listen, I will tell you, good divorce lawyers are worth their weight in gold. Because if you have a circumstance like that, you're going to have somebody you can talk to who they will have dealt with it before. They will have been through it before, and they'll have answers for you. You don't have an answer for every single situation on the planet, but the reality is they've dealt with most of them. Look, I mean, you get a divorce lawyer who's practiced at a high level and start to finish handled cases and tried cases for, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. This isn't their first rodeo. They've seen pretty much everything. That's why when people come in and they say, they're hiding assets. Well, it's funny because people are never nearly as smart or as savvy as you think they are.
Right.
I mean, we've had, guys or gals with cash businesses and they put in their damn bank account. So you're not telling IRS, which is tax evasion.
Yeah.
But then you're putting in your damn bank account. So what am I going to do? Okay, can I have the bank accounts, please? Okay, and I get out a calculator and I add them up.
Yeah.
Okay, 5,000 deposit, 5,000 deposit. I only make $20,000 a year. Yeah, but you deposited $125,000 this year. So I don't know. You tell me. So...
This kind of ties to what you mentioned earlier. Get a hold of your emotions, because hearing something like "I want a divorce," people are just reactionary. They're panicking and they're doing things that they think they're protecting their assets and such. But again, they're making just idiotic moves. And again, it's pretty obvious. Again, I'm pretty sure you've seen this plenty of times where well, we had 100,000 last month and now it's zero. So I don't know.
Right.
I'm broke. I have no money. Like, sure, whatever.
Right. And really you have to, then it comes into play of like, look, let's say it's prior to somebody filing for divorce. So there's no temporary stay. And you each have equal access to the assets that you own collectively, joint bank accounts, et cetera, what have you, right? What can you really do to protect yourself? So you're kind of like, it can be a scary time, but that's the point at which, like, look, you have to, I always tell people, you have to be engaged in the finances. You can't be in a situation where you don't know what the finances are. You're not seeing the monthly statements. You're not looking at the bank accounts. Like, you got to be engaged. And I even say for young couples right now, you should be. That's something you really can't delegate 100%. It's not that it's the same thing, but even like, for example, with the kids, you can't delegate taking care of the kids. You can't I even just my situation, like I'm happily married. I've been happily married for many years now, but I don't think it's appropriate for me to like delegate the care for my kids. Like listen, listeners out there, if you have a different situation that works for you, fine. There's no one size fits all. But in terms of my take on it, look, there's certain things you can't delegate. You need to be in tune with the finances. You need to know what they are. You need to see the retirement statements. You need to see the bank accounts every month. You need to see how much is in your checking account, what your expenses are each month. So even figure, for example, a client comes in the office and says like, hey, I'm ready for a divorce, blah, blah, blah. I say, what do you pay for electric every month? I don't know. How much money do you bring in every month? I don't know. How much do you pay in taxes? I don't know. What was on last year's tax return? I don't know.
Wow.
You'd be surprised, Rudy. There are a lot of clients in that situation, and I'm not blaming them. That is not what I'm doing here. All I'm saying is that for the younger couples who are, contemplating, they're in partnerships, and maybe it's not necessarily married per se, but they're in, a relationship partnership and a financial partnership, right? With the person you're with. So just, each be in tune with what's going on there. And if you have kids together, that's the most important thing in my mind. You should both be engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So
a lot of people are asking, and maybe you can give everybody a good definition of both and maybe what's better for each couple. And again, each situation I understand is completely unique, but can you explain to the audience the difference between a divorce and going through mediation?
Well, divorce mediation is intense. So just as an aside, I'm a divorce mediator, and there are other divorce mediators within my office. Divorce mediation means if you're working with a mediator. So let's say somebody comes into my office and they say, hey, Mr. Vetrano, I want to work with you as a divorce mediator. Okay, fine. I work with the two parties. I don't represent either one of them. Right. But my job is to work with them to work towards an agreement that they both agree to. That's the job generally of a divorce mediator. But if you're doing it one better, in my mind, you need to be knowledgeable enough about the area of law and what's fair and what's typically done so that if they have questions about, hey, what's the calculation for child support? Right. What's typically done with the buyout of the house? It's nice to have somebody who is familiar with that and has experience in that. So only really experienced divorce lawyers can do that. But in addition, think of it like this. With divorce mediation, if I'm your divorce mediator, I'm not representing you against the other party. I'm not looking out for your best interests. So if you're in a situation where, for example, your husband comes in, he makes $1 million a year, and you've been a stay-at-home parent for the past 20 years, really it's going to be tough for you to get back into the workforce. And they say, hey, I don't want to pay you maintenance. And, they've been kind of like bullying you the whole relationship. And you've been, it's been that dynamic where they bully and you acquiesce. I can't represent you. I can't say, hey, that's not fair. That's not what we typically do. I don't represent you. So in a situation where you see that dynamic, and you need to see it, and people need to point it out to you, and you need to recognize it yourself. And even if you go for a consultation with a divorce lawyer, they need to point it out. I did it just the other day. I said, you're in a situation where you typically acquiesce to whatever she wants, and she says, this is what I'm doing. I said, that might not be the best situation for divorce mediation without a lawyer sitting on the sidelines, making sure that whatever you agree to is fair to you. Wow. So you can work with a divorce mediator and then each have a divorce lawyer on the outside to review language, advise you along the way, and represent you to make sure you don't end up in an agreement that's unfair.
Right.
Then the divorce process itself can either be, two lawyers negotiating a fair resolution, or two lawyers duking it out in court over what they believe is right, and then the judge ultimately decides, or even just two pro se litigants either agreeing to something and trying to, piece it together themselves, and or going to court and arguing it out in court. So, I think people say, when people think of divorce litigation, they're like, oh, it's either mediation or it's litigation. But the reality is, a lot of quote unquote litigated divorces are just negotiated resolutions, either between the parties or between the two lawyers. Yeah. So it doesn't. It can take on really any form, and it's really guided by the personalities of the parties, how well they have their emotions under control, what they're seeking to accomplish. Are they looking to be reasonable with each other? And also the personalities of the lawyers and prospectively the judge that's involved. What are we trying to accomplish here, and what's the approach? How knowledgeable are we about everything, and are we gonna be reasonable? What's fair under the law?
Yeah, and I'm assuming, and again, I guess it makes sense that if it's a high conflict divorce, a mediation probably wouldn't be the best course of action, because again, you have two parties that are just at each other's throats.
I think I'm pushing divorce mediation more so and more so, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm seeing, it's funny, I had lunch the other day with a divorce and family law judge who's one of my mentors, really, and I practiced with him for years and practiced before him for years, and now he's doing predominantly divorce mediation, which is great. And we were just talking about, like, I have so many examples of, and so does he, where you go into the case, you gather your information, there's a lawyer on the other side, you're about 30, 60 days in, you have your arms around all the information, it's a straightforward case, you send a proposal over to the other side that says, hey, we're going to split everything 50-50, we're going to have like equal time with the children, or they're aged out, there's not all that relevant, they make about the same amount of money, so it's not really changing any hands, let's just get this done. And then you get a motion in the mail the next day, or you get a request to go to court and argue over stuff. And then you have to defend it. So now you're going back and forth. And now a case that could have been resolved in the first 30, 60, 90 days takes a year to resolve. And like I was telling the judge, I have one seminal example for me, and I'll never forget it as long as I live, cases I handled about 10 years ago. Sent a proposal about 60 days in. Files a motion for stuff they weren't entitled to, back and forth to court, oppose the motion, we win the motion, then they're saying, well, we want to try the case, then, all this BS. Yeah. Almost a year to the day, we settle the case, nearly identical to the original proposal that we sent a year earlier,
wow,
except each client paid their lawyer somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 for litigation.
Wow.
Why in the hell was that necessary?
I was going to ask, what motivated them? If the terms and everything were agreed upon, what is it? Fear, spite?
Well, let's put it this way: when you make a motion for child support,
yeah,
but the child is with my client, you got to question what the hell you're doing, man. Or like you say, hey, I want spousal support, but you're entitled to half the retirement plan, and we're already going to give you half. Let's just get the paperwork done. No, we want to make a motion for spousal support. What? What are you doing? What are you doing? Almost the exclusive, source of income for this person is the retirement plan. We're going to give you whatever you're entitled to under the law, which is, a little bit less than half. But then you're not entitled to maintenance. So just get the paperwork done. No, we're not. We don't want to do that. We want to file for this and file for that and file for the other thing. Then motions back and forth, and then it's just crazy. So again, I tend to really strongly encourage mediation because I think there's multiple different ways you can do it. Look, if you're in a physically abusive relationship and there's orders of protection and stuff like that, that is not a mediation case. That I get. Yeah. But if you say hey, this person tends to try to bully me into things, then I say that's not a mediation case where you go into it alone. Right. But it might be a mediation case where you work with a really savvy mediator. For example, this judge who's seen these contentious relationships and knows the area of law, and then you have your own lawyer representing your interests, then you can still do mediation. Because think of it like this. A lot of the mediation retainers are $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, which is split between the parties. Mm-hmm. And then lawyer fees are $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 per side if you're working with the mediator. Average contested divorce lawyer rate nationally for the U.S. is something like, $16,000, $17,000 per side.
Wow.
That's average. So if initial retainers for divorce lawyers are 5 or 6 or 7, and then you're getting to 20, 25 each, do the math. 25 and 25 is 50, right? And that doesn't guarantee a result. And then you're putting it before a judge where you have no certainty on what they're going to do. I mean, and the longer I've practiced, the wackier and wackier the decisions have become.
Really?
Because I think that the judges just, there's so much movement with the judges, and they have so many cases on their docket, and there's so few judges who've been divorce lawyers to begin with and know the area of law well. And even the law clerks who assist them, most of them don't have a background as a divorce judge or divorce lawyer or experience in the area of law. So, and then you're going to put it in their hands. And look, they've got to get your case off their docket. They've got 250 other cases, 300 other cases. I remember one judge had something like 500, 600 cases on their docket that still hadn't been resolved.
Wow.
Yeah. These caseloads get high. I mean, and I don't know what different jurisdictions or different states are doing, but the reality is there's so many filings. And I think a lot of the communities just don't have enough judges to really take the time with these cases. So then you're going to spend, $25,000 aside and then put it before a judge who really is just overwhelmed with cases. And it's not their fault. They're doing the best they can.
Right.
Versus, maybe you're 4, 5, 6,000 to each lawyer, and then maybe 4, 5, 6,000 to the mediator. Do the math. Do the math. And then you were part of all the negotiations.
Wow.
You were part of weighing in with everything. You took the time to talk about what's fair and how you're going to resolve it. Not hey, you go to a court. I tell clients when I'm handling their case, I said the most expensive thing for you are court appearances. Because think of it like this. I get in my car and I drive to the courthouse. I charge you for that time. That's billable time because whatever it takes me to get to the courthouse. Then if we have to wait and your case isn't called for 2 hours, then you're getting charged for that. And you can very well go before the judge and have them say, oh, how are we doing with disclosure today? Everything's good. Okay, see you guys in 2 weeks. The client's what? Yeah. And then when they get their invoice, and I feel terrible about it, but you have to bill for your time as a lawyer. You can't do things. You can't be working on a case and doing it for free because you're covering overhead and everything else. But then they're but Dennis, a court appearance is $1,000 for the travel and the wait and the day, and nothing happened.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm very cautious with clients at the outset. I say, look, I want you to go in eyes wide open. I want you to know what this can cost you. I really want you to think long and hard about how reasonable we want to be, what kind of an axe to grind you have about this case. Check your emotions at the door. Whatever remnants of the broken relationship you have, you need to get back at them. Figure that out in your therapist's office.
Yeah.
And we'll figure out your case here.
Wow.
So
thank you for sharing that, because that's something that I never really thought of unless you're there. I mean, you're filing, you think this is a normal timeline, maybe 60 days, 90 days. But again, it depends on the docket, the judge's workload, and if they're even available to look at it. So thank you for sharing with that. That's a good.
And listen, you'll have a situation at the break of the year, just after an election year like we're having right now. We're getting notices. Oh, your judge changed.
Wow. Wow. How long that can delay a divorce?
Oh my God, of course. I've had situations where the judge changed once or twice. The lawyer and or the judge in the case died, and then a new lawyer, or there was a conflict, or they fired their lawyer and got another one. Imagine how these cases can drag.
Wow.
And again, I just want to stress, my job is transparency. I'm going to tell you the things you need to hear, not the things you necessarily want to hear. And maybe you leave my office and say, fuck that, Mr. Vetrano. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm going to this guy over here, told me $5,000. He's going to fix everything up for me. We're going to be good. Okay. Wow. Because my conscience at the end of the day is clear in that I was honest with you and transparent about what really happens. We've handled thousands of these divorce cases. Thousands, I'm not exaggerating. And I just want you to, I really want you to have as much information as you can before you go into the process, so you can, go in eyes wide open. And if you say, hey, Dennis, I don't care. This is what I want to do. Number one, I have to think about, if it's something crazy, if you say hey, screw that, Dennis, I had a guy tell me a while ago, it was a child of my client who insisted on being present. By the way, I came to a point in my career where I say, I don't allow, in large part, you really got to give me something compelling. I don't allow family members to be present for meetings with my clients. Okay. In addition to the fact that it's a huge problem confidentiality-wise, it also tends to create problems in the case because now you have somebody with no legal training trying to give legal advice to the client in the wings. And also, remember, they're also carrying their own baggage. You know, what did you do to my daughter? Like, what did you do to my son? Like, we've got to get back at I had somebody literally tell me, well, can you listen, let's just take this thing to court and let's just jerk this thing off as long as we can. Oof. When he said that, I was dead silent.
Yeah.
And I was like, I had to speak to the client and say, look, if you need this person as an interloper in this case, you don't need me. You need another lawyer. That's not something I do.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice. Wow.
And that's the point at which you got to know as a lawyer. You got to find the exit door, man. You can't, because what will happen is then you'll continue spinning your wheels, spend a lot of money, make it long, protracted, aggravated. And again, I think in those sorts of cases, those particular people are always looking for a proverbial white whale, right?
Yeah.
There's always an enemy. There's always somebody to blame other than them. Initially, it's the person on the other side. Then it will become the other lawyer. Then it will become the judge. And guess who it becomes at the end when you tell them how much it costs to do all this stuff that really is unnecessary?
Yeah.
You become that white whale, and then it's complaints, and then it's like, so I don't want to spend people's money in that way, and I don't want to be involved in any of that.
And thank you for doing that. I mean, sincerely, like, wow. And again, everybody who's listening, I hope you're taking notes on that because that's a lot of great information there. Let's go to another everyone's favorite topic, infidelity. Let's talk about that. This is a common question a lot of women have been sending me. So if somebody suspects their spouse is cheating and wants to gather evidence and screenshots to prove they're cheating, are there any legal consequences to hacking or maybe invading your spouse's devices that are going to hurt you in court?
Well, let's put it this way. My question there, not to skirt the question, but is why?
Why?
Why do you want to gather that information? Why?
Okay.
I mean, I think for people, and this kind of like dovetails with the like get your arms around the emotions sort of situation. There's so much intertwined with that, right? There's the trust. There's the, if you know they're cheating in your heart of hearts. I mean, if you believe they're cheating in your heart of hearts, you're probably right, first off. And if you are not right, you have to question what's wrong with your relationship such that you don't trust them that much, right? These are all signs of a failing relationship that need to be repaired if you want to, maintain the relationship. So if you have a failed relationship, then that is not going to work. You go into marriage counseling and try to fix it. And if you can't fix it or you don't want to fix it, then you're moving towards divorce. See, for New York State, we're now a no-fault state. So you don't really need to prove grounds, meaning you don't need to prove fault to get a divorce. You don't need to prove abandonment or infidelity or cruel and inhumane treatment. You don't need to prove those things. So really, there's no good reason to need that information or to get mired in that. Okay. Now, other jurisdictions are different. So my first question for people about that is why do you want that information? Right. Why do you want to go to lengths to gather that information? Surreptitiously or otherwise, right? Yeah. Why would you want that information? But if you do need it, my advice is always to go through, appropriate legal channels. And we've hired private investigators before, and there are things that they have access to or they can do based on their license as a private investigator that we as normal lay people cannot do. They can do it legally and we can't. Again, what I've had a lot lately is, people like, piggybacking on my videos saying like, hey, I can hack your wife's, accounts or I can find out where your husband is. I can put a tracker on his. Listen, number one, you got a problem with legality because there are privacy rules there, right? Which can be criminal charges and hold huge penalties. And then number two, you put a tracker on someone's car legally to me, looks like stalking to me.
Yeah.
Looks like prospective criminal charge there. So, or a piece of that. I mean, if somebody's going to go to that length, odds are they're doing the other things that could amount to a prospective stalking charge. So, again, I don't recommend doing those things. I recommend going to a divorce lawyer and saying, hey, if there's a good reason why you would need that information, ask them how you can go about getting it legally. And typically, in my experience, that involves, hiring a private investigator. And the ones that I've hired have been great.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so depending on, you said New York is a no-fault state, but I guess in the states that do fault states, that this evidence would help. Again, if it's not that you're gaining it yourself, but if you hire a private investigator, this shows that, yes, my spouse cheated, they're at fault for the divorce. Is that and again, I know you're not an expert in those areas, that's not your jurisdiction, but is infidelity, can that hurt you if you're proven to be the cheater in those areas?
Yeah, let's dissect that a little bit. New York used to be a fault state,
right,
which meant you'd have to prove grounds. So proving grounds, one of those grounds could be infidelity. So how would you prove those grounds? It was a hard ground to prove, but if you had private investigator information, you could prove it. It didn't, even at the time when I was practicing, again, I've been practicing roughly about 25 years. Nice. Even at the time I was practicing when it was still a fault state, that really wouldn't impact the finances all that much, right? The main thing that impacts the finances that could be attributed to fault in some way is domestic violence. I know in New York State it's a factor for maintenance, it's a factor for dividing assets. So yes, extreme domestic violence abuse can be weighed as a factor to determine like how we're going to divide assets or how we're going to do spousal support and stuff like that. But the other aspects of fault aren't necessarily a basis to change the division of assets or the payment of spousal support or any of those things. But again, in the states that it is of value, I think, again, the private investigator would definitely be the route you'd want to take to try to gather that information.
Okay, that's valid. Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now, people always ask as well, is my wife asked for a divorce, and they insist, let's go to counseling and try to save it. In your experience, 25 years of doing this, have you ever seen a situation where somebody decided to file for divorce and the other spouse said, let's try to save it, let's go to counseling? Have you ever seen the marriage turn around and be saved?
Not really.
Yeah, I thought so.
Not really. I've seen it. It's funny because I have so many cases where people come in and they say, we've done counseling, it hasn't worked, and here we are, and those usually just sail right straight through to divorce. The cases that I find that you have the turnaround are a lot of times midstream of the divorce case and I think in large part because they get worn down. The process is taxing.
I bet.
I think that's so let's kind of go back to the beginning of our conversation. Like, I think the preparation for the process is super important. And maybe one of the things I failed to mention is to prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for the process. You need to really be ready. Really be ready to be patient.
And that's a good point, but how does one get ready though? Because I've been through it myself, and it's such a draining experience. For me going through it, you just have to really just be sure that you are at the right mindset when you have to make decisions and they're not emotionally based. Yeah. And the best decision that you can make in front of you at that time. But it's really hard when someone's going through it, like, how can you do it? It's so painful, but
it is. And I don't think we focus enough on the simple things. So let me give you kind of some imagery here. Yeah. Have you ever been out on a fishing boat? Get seasick?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Listen, I think I have the record of my my brother-in-law's fishing boat. I think I threw up 7 times one time. It was really choppy, and we were a relatively small boat, and we were out like 40 miles in the Gulf of Mexico. And anyhow, but what do they tell you when it's you're all over the place and you're on that roller coaster? Look on the horizon. Look at the horizon. Honestly, focus on your life post-divorce and stay focused on the horizon. Don't get so mired in what you're in. It's a temporary situation. You will get through it. I've always said to people, look, it's a roller coaster ride, but you're going to get off. Yeah. You go to Disney, you're on a roller coaster ride, you feel like you're going to die, but you're going to get off of that roller coaster ride at some point, and you've just got to focus on your life post-divorce. And a lot of it, I think, is about focusing inward, being introspective. Like saying like, hey, where am I at in my life? Like what's the meaning of life? Like what am I doing here? Like what am I going to do next? Like what is my life going to look like with my kids? What's that vision going to be? How do we make our lives better? How do we improve ourselves? How do I improve myself? And a lot of times I think, I don't want to say it's just women, but I think a lot of women, and I think guys too, they internalize blame for the divorce and they feel like a failure So I think trying to turn your mindset around, and listen, it's societal, it's familial, it's religious, it's a lot of things. You're going to have everybody telling you, and even if they don't tell you, even just the looks you get or like the comments you'll get, and it just magnifies or multiplies your feeling, your sense of failure.
You become the example of what not to be.
Oh my
Couples
God,
will talk about like, honey, promise me we'll never be like them. Like, that's what we talked about.
Right. Yeah. So I think when you're in it, let your lawyer do their job. Do what they ask you to do. Don't feel like you need to do it for them. Let them do their job. But if they ask you to do stuff at home, do it at home. Have a good counselor who's familiar with your type of situation. If there's trauma there, if there's been abuse, if there was sexual abuse, make sure you have a counselor who's in tune with your situation that you're happy with, that you can work with.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, do simple things. I put together a piece a while ago, if you're in the divorce process or even just coming out of the divorce process, one of the most important things you can do is take a vacation. And people jumped all over that. Oh, this guy's out of touch and doesn't know. Did I tell you needed to go to Bermuda, pull out all the stops for 2 weeks and spend $20,000? Nope. It might be just going to a friend's cabin that they loan you for a weekend.
Right.
Something as much as you can to clear your head and take your mind off of all this turmoil around you at the time. And focus on, what your life is going to look. I think when you do that, you can kind of pull yourself out of the process a little bit, because it's so hard to stop yourself from blaming yourself, from feeling like a failure, from dwelling on all of the turmoil, from thinking the worst. I'm a classic overthinker. Like, oh my God, this thing happened. It's going to be 10,000 times worse than I thought. But you got to no, it's probably going to be better than you thought, and you're going to be done with it sooner than you think. So just take a deep breath, focus on you, focus on the horizon. You will be out of it. You'll get off the ride. And hopefully, if you've done the work throughout the process, you're going to come out of that situation even better.
Yeah, absolutely. Like me. Like it came out
right.
better.
Right. And what you'll find, and what I find with a lot of people I've spoken with, is they find new careers. They find new passions. They find new meaning in life for them. Right. Yeah. And they turn around and they're like, not that they say it was the best thing that ever happened to them, but they say like, hey, without that process, I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be the me I am now. Yeah. Right.
Exactly. And I tell a lot of people that you'll be grateful for going through that. I know that's kind of tough to hear, but a lot of times it just pushes you to the path that you were supposed to be on. And you don't have it's odd going into, like I mentioned in our last podcast, at 39, going out into the world for the first time as an adult by myself. Never, because again, I got married at 21. Now I'm 39. Like I get to introduce myself for the first time. Get to say hi to people for the first time. I get to paint an image of myself that I want the world to see me as. It's so liberating. It's terrifying, but it's also wonderful because you're discovering who you are. And I tell people, I remind them of that. Like, it's a wonderful journey. It's scary, but it's worth it.
It is. And it's funny because I did a podcast just recently with I Do Too. And what we talked about is like being comfortable being alone.
Yes.
Being comfortable in your own skin, not feeling like you necessarily need anybody else to fulfill your life. Do your kids need to be part? Of course, that's not what I'm suggesting. But what I'm suggesting is not always feeling like you need to have a husband or wife. And they say, well, I want to have a partner. That's okay. That's okay. I get it. I get it if that's what fits your life best. Mm-hmm. But I would suggest you just get comfortable in your own skin. Learn to love yourself again and love being with yourself. And rediscover the things that make you, you know? And sometimes they've changed. A lot of people get married at 18, they get married at 16, and now they're 55. Yeah. And they're like, I'm a totally different person than I was back then. I don't like any of the stuff I used to like. I'm a totally different. And that's the point of it. That's the point of like the rediscovery, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and I think when you do that, then you become a more fulfilled, a better you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You're happy with yourself, and it's a happiness you haven't felt in years, and it's so fulfilling. And again, and thank you for answering that question, because every time people ask me, does counseling work? I'm like, no. At that point, if somebody tells you, like it's for the women, if the woman tells her husband, I want a divorce, guys, I told the guys, it's not like she just made it up on the spot. She's been thinking about this for at least a year, maybe a couple years. She's been planning. She's been thinking about this. So when you hear it, she's made up her mind. And a lot of women have confided in me and said that when he says, let's give me a second chance, let me try something, he's like, I gave you 5 years. I gave you 10 years. I'd made these problems that you didn't want to speak about. You just ignored them. And now you want a chance when I've made up my mind. It pisses them off is what happens. So again, I always tell people, you try counseling, but in my experience and from what I hear from other people, no, you're just wasting your time. You're prolonging the inevitable.
I'm clapping, and not because I'm happy to hear that counseling doesn't work on average, at least in our experience. I'm clapping because I feel like my experience in the ladies that I represented, when they get to the place where, and again, I think it's, it's probably true for some guys too, but I think predominantly percentage-wise I see it with the ladies, is they say, look, I'm by the time I get to the place where I'm saying divorce, I've asked you too many damn times.
Exactly.
So I think, you hear that saying, like, there's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? We need to listen. That's part of the problem with relationships these days. And especially, if your wife in this example is saying like, hey, this or that, or like you're sensing, like, you just have to be present. You got to be in it. And sometimes not necessarily listening to the words they say. Right. It's about observing the things that they do, or their body language, or your connection with them, and being in tune. Mm-hmm. And then, like, hey, when you see those things, you say, have that saying, like, when you see something, say something.
Yeah.
I mean, it applies to relationships too. When you see something, say something, and then start talking about it. Don't wait till you've seen it consistently for 5 years and nothing has changed and you've had no conversations about it. And then, like I said, for guys, like, listen, guys, in large part, cannot stand a lot of the videos that I do. But I'm telling them the things they need to hear, not the things they want to hear. I am tired of having guys come into my office and say, Dennis, I have no friends. I'm nowhere. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I lost my family. I lost my wife. I lost my kids. And then say, how did we get here?
Thank you.
How did we get here? I'm trying to talk to you about what I see by the time people come into my office so you can fix it before they need to come into my office. Mm-hmm. And you can't just say, well, it wasn't me. It's a bullshit. Okay. Don't listen to me. Fine.
Yeah. Why do you think that is, though? I know of a lot of male friends who go through that, and they insist on hating or blaming others instead of taking account. And I don't want to paint all guys in this picture. Please, don't take that away from what I'm saying. But for the most part, whenever I have appointments with some clients, they're angry and they consistently blame everybody, and they don't want to take any accountability in that. Why do you think that is, in your experience?
That's a good question. I think it's I don't want to obviate any blame, but the reality is I think it's a social thing. I think in large part men are raised to ignore problems and just soak stuff up and not talk and not be introspective and not self-evaluate and not even ask themselves, are they happy?
Very true. Very true. Yeah.
So I have the classical guy thing. Oh, there's no physical relationship with my wife, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but you plod along for years in that situation. Mm-hmm. And let's be selfish about this for a minute. You don't ever ask yourself, are you happy with the way your marriage is or the way your relationship is? Yeah. And here's the thing. What you're not going to like that I'm going to say is, have you thought about the things that you do or fail to do that has produced that negative or non-existent reaction from your wife? Have you thought about that? Have you evaluated that? Have you stepped back and said, like, hey, she's not reacting to me physically like she did 10 years ago. I wonder why that is.
Yeah.
We don't take the time to just ask those questions. So, okay, just plod along, just keep going along. Whereas I think, and again, I'm not trying to take credit away from ladies either, because I think they're very good at it and I think they put the time into it. But I also think that there's a social component to it as well, is that, being more introspective, self-evaluating a little bit more, they tend to be better at that on average. And then they're going to take a look and they're going to self-evaluate. Am I happy? Mm-hmm. Is that life is short? Is this the way I want my life to be? But I think both partners need to be doing that in a relationship, and then do check-ins. And then there's a thing, they have something that they were promoting on TikTok, like this journal that you pass back and forth between the two spouses, which I think is brilliant. Because a lot of times people are afraid to say the things to their partner, to their face that they're really thinking.
Yeah.
But there needs to be communication and honesty there, right?
100%. Yes.
And early
I don't want to stir the
on.
pot. I don't want to get him upset. So
Right.
I didn't say anything for years. Like, no, don't do that.
Right. And they're like, and that's the same thing. Look, it's the same thing across the board with any social relationship, right? Even just as a lawyer, like I said, I did a consult the other day and I'm telling the guy, I'm like, look, I don't care if you hire me or don't, but I'm going to tell you what you need to hear.
Awesome.
This relationship, this dynamic is a situation where your spouse pushes and you acquiesce. That's what, from everything you've described to me. And yet the two of you get along pretty well. So like I just, whereas, another lawyer will say, well, I'm going to go stick it to this person. I'm going to do this. And listen, there needs to be transparency. There needs to be honesty in any relationship.
Yeah.
And, not the least of which is your most important relationship in your life, which is with your husband or wife.
Yeah. You need to have those uncomfortable conversations. You do.
And it's funny because I tell people when they're doing prenups, it's not romantic to do a prenup. If you can't have financial conversations at the outset about what your assets are, what your credit card debt is, what your source of income is, how much money you make, what your expenses are, if you can't talk about those things early on, where are you going?
That's a valid point. Yeah.
Where are you going?
Or maybe they want to bring it up because you don't have faith in us, honey, that we're going to last. And maybe that's kind of, you've seen that as well, maybe in your experience that.
I have, Rudy, 100%. And I think we've gotten so enamored with the fairy tale of a marriage. And in some ways, we've lost sight of the actual partnership that comes along with it, which is probably the most important piece. Are you going to have a beautiful fairy tale wedding with the horse and buggy and okay, great. How much, what's your overhead every month? How much have you made the last few years? Can you pay your bills?
Yeah.
Do you spend too much money? Do you like to gamble? I don't know. I mean, these are honest questions you should be having. Because again, once you are in a relationship like that and then you introduce children to it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. They're innocent. Yeah. That you have to answer to them. Okay. And they didn't choose this situation.
Right.
So, now it makes it much more complex.
Yes. Well, I know we're over on time, Dennis. And again, sincerely, this is your second time on the podcast. And I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. Your wisdom is priceless. And again, I thank you so much for your time and answering these questions for me.
Rudy, anytime, man. I love talking to you. I remember you said when we were trying to prepare for the podcast, I have some questions about this and questions about that. I said to my assistant, I said, tell Rudy, I don't care, whatever he wants to talk about. I'll talk about whatever you want. You want to talk about cars? You want to talk about TikTok? It doesn't matter. You know me. I talk about anything. And I really, listen, Rudy, I love what you're doing. I love your show. I'll come back anytime. So.
All right. Well, again, sir, thank you for your time and have a good one, right?
You too, Rudy. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.